When you're ready.
I'm gonna grab one that's more akin to my style.
The PDW, the personal defense weapon. A lot of times when you think of a PDW, you're looking at a P90,
MP5K,
K PDW, an MP7, or an MP9, TP9 for those in the civilian world. So what is a PDW? Now, my name is Henry. I'm from 9-Hole Reviews, and
I'm Josh.
And on our main channel, 9-Hole Reviews, we've done an extensive amount of publication on the PDW. But we still see a lot of discussion out there, namely, is a PDW a real thing?
Well, and I think it's because, Henry, even with the robust classification system video you did, for example, there are still no obvious and exclusive defining attributes that you can look at on this gun that distinctly make it a PDW, whereas that could be applied then to another gun that is still in fact a PDW.
I think this comes down to the fact that a PDW, a personal defense weapon, is an intent-based classification of these things. Now, I will take it one step farther. A sniper rifle or a designated marksman rifle, that is an intent-based use of a rifle. What differentiates a sniper rifle from a hunting rifle?
It's used by a sniper?
Correct. It is an intent-based thing. So when you're talking about a PDW, this is an item that bridges between a rifle and a pistol. And it does a lot of the things in between these two well in its own way.
And again, this highlights the difficulty of this conversation, because I may own this as a civilian in the US as a defensive tool.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
And as a result of that, I might call this, by your very definition, a personal defense weapon.
But it's all relative, right? Because look at this. Keep that up here. This is considered, the M1 Carbine is considered by many one of the first PDWs out there. It is longer than the M4. But why is it considered a PDW? Because the intent for the M1 Carbine initially was to equip rear line, rear echelon guys who did not necessarily use pistols at the highest caliber.
Level of proficiency, Henry. Caliber is a pun in this instance.
but you still wanted them to have that lethality to defend themselves if the case came to be. Now,
and would you say it's because that this was also in contrast to the Garand versus...
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Now, if that's what I was getting. If you're looking at the contemporary rifle that this was employed next to, the M1 Garand, the 03A3,
yeah,
03A4 snipers, the machine guns.
Yeah.
This absolutely is between that and a pistol. And it covers that let's say 0 to 200 ground fairly well.
Yeah.
In fact, I'd say that's fairly lethal at this distance.
Yes, I would say so. So, Henry, how then do we add in one additional element of conversation, which is how we differentiate, again, using the bridging the gap conversation, right, between your rifle and your pistol? How do we look to something like, say, an MP5, not the K PDW variant, but like the regular MP5 submachine gun, and say, well, that in and of itself is bridging between a rifle and a pistol as well, is it not?
It is. You can use the MP5 as a PDW, but a lot of these PDWs were designed from the ground up as with an intent of bridging that gap in between and allowing the user to use it to the extent of a in-between rifle and pistol category.
So maybe there's even a secondary or another asterisk that we have to draw around this conversation, which is it's also the intent of the design and not just the intent of the user.
Right. Well, yes. I would say that really fuzzies it because the design could be the person putting a contract in and saying, how do we want to use this? But yes, it's all of these elements layered, right?
And
that's why this topic gets so much discussion, it's fruitful discussion, it's interesting discussion, but I would say, we'll get to this at the end of the video, this actually has more implications to the contemporary use of these things, because these things are becoming more and more prolific. I would say pistol braces brought a lot of that.
Yep.
But even more so, these things have become more prolific because of a lot of things that are getting people to think about why they want to get into firearms. Now,
Sure.
I did want to, of course, knowing me, I like the historical aspect and development of these things. I did want to talk about some interesting use cases of what you can consider as a PDW, like this Mauser C96 broom handle pistol. Now, of course, you saw that this is the holster for it. And back in the day, made famous by people like Winston Churchill, who actually used a C96 as well. This was a very compelling case for a rifle. Remember, like the contemporaries during this period were, you had submachine guns, the MP18, which was a very honking heavy submachine gun. Okay. You had pistols, a lot of revolvers. Semi-auto pistols were in their infancy. Again, C96, 1896, right? So then you had your rifles, and your bolt action rifles primarily were the thing. So you're talking about a system that has a 10-round magazine.
Internal only, right?
Internal magazine only. And when you load it, this could operate either as a pistol, I'm actually not the best shot with this thing.
There's 2 alphas.
Thank you, Josh. That makes me feel better.
Yeah. I mean, let's not worry about that first one.
But when you get into it, if you, let's say you get into some scenarios and you actually need to use this at an engaged distance, this most certainly is better than
That's actually pretty impressive to shoot it like that as opposed... Yeah, like that was pretty good.
Again, remember, this is the turn of the century.
Yeah.
The other contemporary to this is going to be the artillery Luger. Now, the artillery Luger, people will think that, oh, it's an artillery Luger because it's got a really long barrel. That's one of the distinctive traits of the artillery Luger, right? Look at this in the artillery Luger. What do you see on the sights?
I see 1,000 yard or meter sights.
Now, that's a little bit...
What are you trying to say, Henry?
The idea here is that... Okay, so first of all, the artillery Luger. The artillery Luger is not the artillery Luger because you can shoot it like an artillery cannon. No. It's because it was issued to artillerymen. So artillerymen being soldiers who had to primarily, if they had a small arm like this, they would keep it in their holster, and they would primarily be working the artillery cannon. That was their primary weapon. Now, what happened if they got raided by a raid party? Would they want to pull out their revolver to respond to that? Or would you rather have a system that you could quickly fold out and turn into something that bridges between a rifle and a pistol in a trench setting?
In a defensive setting.
In a defensive setting, correct. Yeah. There is a gap between rifle and pistol because pistols inherently are more difficult to shoot than rifles. And I would say one of the best firearms to come out of World War II really was the M1 carbine, in my opinion. This is my opinion. You have a cartridge that was fairly effective out to 300 meters.
Definitely at least 200. We wouldn't
fairly
argue
effective.
With 200.
Yeah, we've shot it well farther than that, but the effectiveness is really there. On top of that, the lethality is much greater than a pistol because you're able to shoot it much more precise at closer ranges and longer distances. One of the things that was clearly I wouldn't say an issue, America always did well with logistics. One of the things was that this shot a different cartridge, right? So logistically, if you were to provide cartridges for troops, it's easy to provide 9mm, but the cartridge for 9mm really tops off at 150 or so, 200 maybe, right? Especially in a shorter barrel pistol. So you're extending your performance with a different cartridge, but that then puts logistical strain on your logistical system, just one extra cartridge. So if we're looking at it, the Soviets actually came up with a different approach of using the same rifle cartridge as their main rifle, but chambering it for a much smaller package. And this is, of course, the AKS-74U, affectionately known as the Krinkov. Don't worry about the one up top.
I mean, this is a psychopathic setup.
Yes, I mean, you're talking about cutting the barrel in half, still keeping the reliability, but then at the same time, what do I have to compare this to? The MP5 is not that much smaller than the
K
AKS-74U, and that is the K. The full-size MP5 is actually a very similar setup.
Yeah.
Now,
that obviously comes with some inherent drawbacks, though, as well, right?
now the plus side on the for the Soviets is logistically, on the logistical system, you're using the same cartridges.
Same bullets, everything's great.
Right, but what happens when you chop a barrel in half? You get a lot of that unburned powder. Now, I will say, as far as the Krink goes, this specific muzzle device actually takes care of a lot of that flash and concussion.
Dude, it makes a huge difference.
And it was, for guys who are usually suffering when we're shooting 10-inch AR-15s, stepping into the Krink, and when we shot it indoors, actually not a lot of concussion and not a lot of flash. Now, this was used by a lot of their tanker units, radiomen, basically what you would think secondary units would be. But somewhere along the line, you had your special operations guys, your SF guys, and they started looking at these things and saying, you know what? You're bringing a decent 200-meter capability in a really small package. We do a lot of things like airdrop. We do a lot of maritime operations to where you're doing amphibious assaults, you're boarding vessels, doing VBSS operations. You're doing a lot of things where a compact system is advantageous for the special operations guys. And that was sort of the inflection point of this. Spetsnaz was trying to experiment with a lot of AKS-74U, and Spetsnaz being the Soviet special operations guys. They noted that while it is very compact, the lack of distance was disconcerting in Afghanistan, in a location where distance is king. But it still carried over, and a lot of Russian law enforcement units ended up using the AKS-74U all the way through the fall of the Soviet Union into the Russian Federation, and still being used a lot these days by a lot of the more specialized units out there in the Eastern Bloc, the former Eastern Blocs. But on the Western side, we had a lot of development towards a new type of PDW system that really differed between two classes. One class was using its own specialized cartridge, and this is the 5.7x28 cartridge that FN had developed in the 90s.
Yep.
The other side of it would be what you see right here, the H&K MP5K PDW. Now, the MP5K was already a thing back in the day, but H&K USA was the one who spearheaded this. And the idea was, again, to hit some of those SOCOM contracts for the Special Operations Forces. You added a suppressor compatible muzzle to use suppressors, which this one does not. You added a stock for increased control under recoil, because the original MP5Ks had no stock. You were using it with sling tension and pushing it out like so. And so the idea was then, this increases the lethality of systems like this to where, let's say you had this, even if it were holstered or if it were under the shoulder holster, you would be able to quickly deploy this, get shots on target, or flip open the stock, really then rain down some of the cartridges onto your intended target as you needed. And so this is where we arrive to current day PDW doctrine. Nothing really has changed as much on the doctrine, in a sense that the idea for these things is to bridge between a pistol and a rifle. But the idea of the rifle certainly has changed a lot. And so when the rifle changes this much, what then is the gap that you're trying to bridge? It is more so this than it is that. And so this is where we arrive at the PDW conversation. As you're looking at PDWs for the modern era, as a consumer, Josh, what do you think about PDWs? What applies to what your thoughts are when you're talking about PDWs?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to very specific instances. Not all the time, not here in the US anyways, but in some very specific instances, it may be advantageous to have more than just the basic subcompact style concealed carry pistol.
Right.
And so you're looking at, again, something probably not dissimilar to this.
Again, if you're looking at this, Josh, would you mind collapsing the stock again? This is an item that fits inside of a small laptop case that at 30 yards, you're able to drop doubles onto a reduced C-zone size target. So that target itself is about the size of my torso itself. That brings a lot of capability, and we've shot this out to 200 meters and onwards. While the conversation of the PDW in a civilian setting is, some would say it's a political conversation, I would say on the practical sense, if this is useful, if this has a use case for you, I think for me anyways, a lot of it boils down to the cartridge of what it uses. So logistics, the same problem that the Russians faced of having a cartridge that you could use and find and source in the long term, but then also, how small is it? How small is it? And then if you're stretching it past that.
And I think that's the key. So for you, you asked me from a commercial perspective, and I tried to give myself a use case that made sense, but I think a better way to describe it would be to have a package that fits very compact and is a low impact to overall signature,
right,
while also potentially needing that type of enhanced protective firepower.
Right. All in all, if the concept of the PDW intrigues you, price aside, price is always going to be a thing that drives this type of stuff. Price aside, logistical supply is always going to be a concern. Logistical carrying capacity is another concern when you're talking about something that you could potentially carry about very easily. And then at the very end, the third case is going to be if you actually need to use it. Let's just assume that you would have to use it at whatever setting. Without ear protection, and in the setting you're going to use it, is that flash and concussion going to affect you? Because running a suppressor on a PDW like this takes it away from that compactness and the classification of a PDW.
I think that's a really key point, Henry, because a lot of people, they'll see like they'll call a 10.5-inch AR their version of a PDW and say, oh, well, and I'll suppress it. But at that point, you basically have a gun that's the same size as a full-on 16-inch rifle, right? Except
the weight is completely off in the front end.
Yeah, so I think that's a key distinction that you have to be aware that while that may be a prime, great setup for you in your intended use case, it's not the same thing as talking about this.
Right.
Right, like this and that aren't the same thing. And that's where the classification of PDW ultimately comes in. As some might say, I'll know it when I see it.
That's right. So, anything else to add to PDWs, Josh?
No, sir. Guys and gals, thanks for tuning into this episode of Midway USA. Until next time, we'll see you on the range.
716, this is Steel 96, 4 Vic, 8 pass, Redcon 1, green to green, how copy, over.
Steel 96, this is 716, roger, over. 1 thing.